but I'm glad that you do acknowledge that enslaved labor made the United States cotton economy possible. And it was the cotton economy that transformed the United States from a colonial society into a global trading power.
Glad to have you, amazing viewer. It's another exciting time at Comfort for Life Network. I bring to you compilation of TikTok videos for educational purposes. So if this is the type of videos you like to see, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the bell so that you get notified whenever you have a new video. I came across this video on my For You page on TikTok and find it insightful. This is an Asian American creator, and I love and appreciate her content and the type of advocacy that she makes for Black and colored people in the US. She spent a lot of time researching and knowing the history, and she knows a lot. Like, she knows a lot about the history, and I like how she brings it plainly and openly and the way it is, without falsifying the history. So it's history, and she also acknowledges that she's part of the privileged group because she's Asian American. This, according to research, Asian Americans are among the privileged group of immigrants and also successful immigrant group in the US. So some people use that to silence her, but she has proven a love and effort, and she continues advocating for them. One thing I noted from her speech was, though I'm privileged in this country, I'm not proud that this privilege remains greater than that of others due to their races. So she knows that I'm Asian. Yes, I'm Asian. I have this race, but it doesn't make me superior than others, though I'm benefiting from that system that upholds racism, you know. She also acknowledges that together with her family, they have also benefited from a system that's built off of stolen land and labor from Black people, you know. Those are the people who make America great. I will keep mentioning that. They are the people who have built the economy of America. So I will be letting you listen to the few stitches that I put together, but it's interesting to see how some of these podcasts are taking slavery as a motivational speech.
Slaves worked all the hours they were awake for their entire lives. I think, like, if they can do it, so can I.
I'm going to Target and destroying every microphone I see because these podcasts is getting ridiculous. You use slavery as a motivation tactic? Like, what you going to say when this don't work? Oh, if something's in your way, remember 9/11. They got it out the way and they not there till this day. That's how you sound, using tragedy to motivate. What happened to early bird gets the worm? Hey, be the hardest worker in the room. Now you talking about, hey, you got to work hard like a slave because they worked hard. You can too, you punk bitch. And he said it like these slaves applied for the job of slavery. Like they bumped into it on LinkedIn or something like that. It had their resume. Oh, I had 200 years of slavery under my belt. Like they didn't put this on their resume, sir. You know that, right? Some of them was lazy as hell. They didn't want to be up. Some of them would have loved to wake up and scroll on TikTok and whatnot, but they couldn't, because if they did, they might have died or got whipped with your dumb ass.
You are so close to hitting the mark. Let's see if we can get it to connect. Why do you think that I am an Asian American whose family started coming to the United States in the 1870s after the Civil War, and who was born in the United States in the 1970s after the Black Civil Rights Movement participate in advocacy? Why do you think that I engage in anti-racism, support affirmative action, support diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, support reparations, and support land back? Why do you think most of the work that I do and mutual aid that I engage in occurs in global majority centering spaces? It is exactly because, despite knowing that I and my family did not directly participate in stealing land and natural resources from Native Americans and in the chattel slavery of Black Americans, I acknowledge that I and my family have benefited from a system that was built off of stolen land from stolen labor. So I recognize that participating in this system contributes to ongoing Native genocide and contributes to the ongoing marginalization of Black Americans. That is exactly why I advocate to make sure that the system pays what it owes. What's your excuse?
Well, America is kind of founded on narcissism in a certain way, and let me explain. I mean, true pathological narcissism, what it does in interpersonal relationships is colonize reality. It colonizes people's lives. Like narcissists move in and they have this singular distorted version of reality that they live in that they pull everybody into. right? So narcissism is actually the pathology of colonization, the gaslighting, which is propaganda, the emotional regulation, which denies indigenous peoples and the oppressed an opportunity to properly characterize and define their lived experience, including how they feel about the process of colonization. Everything of the process of colonization tracks perfectly with the reality of narcissistic abuse and being in a one-on-one interpersonal relationship with a narcissist, right? And so something we all experience, those of us that come from narcissistic families and come into the awareness of it, is this urge to like tell everybody, usually our siblings. And what we find out is that a lot of people don't want to know, and that they don't see it that way. And that's largely because narcissism is the water that all of us American fish are swimming in. And to properly call out narcissism and to properly understand narcissism is to literally see it as the driving pathology of our country, which we'll just call ideology. It's profits over people, right? It's my needs at the expense of everybody else. Everywhere we look, American culture is codified narcissism. Capitalism is a narcissism contest. How do I get my needs met and hoard all of the perspective, as in money, at the expense of everybody else? It's competitive narcissism. And so it's not that we're giving narcissists too many passes. It's that we literally reward narcissism. We reward the people that can extract all of their emotions, go out, and basically tyrannize everybody else for profit. Just think of profits over people as this like perspective over people, right? Like the urge to make money for some individuals cancels out the lived experience and a healthy, good, resource-filled life for everybody else. And it is being normalized. I mean, I've spent the last 10 years basically talking about Donald Trump's narcissism, and it's like we're back to square one. It's like I'm talking on it on here, and people, if Donald Trump didn't teach us about pathological narcissism and why it's dangerous to have men with it in power and women, then nothing's going to teach us, because we literally worship narcissism. Look at TikTok.
Am I privileged? Absolutely. But no, it will not be good enough for me as long as my privilege remains greater than that of others because of race. So we who speak out against racism are not talking about the past. The people who are stuck in the past are the people who refuse to let go of their flags and statues and monuments and road names and building names honoring literal traitors, as though their own identities and egos and current way of life depend upon it. The people who refuse to let go of their ridiculous mascots because they are nostalgic for genocide being committed on United States soil. The people who are currently honoring a new traitor. The people who perpetuate the hatred of the traitors whom they honor. So we are talking about the present. We are talking about how the United States is currently involved in multiple genocides of Black and brown people. We are talking about the school-to-prison pipeline and law enforcement and the prison industrial complex perpetuating modern-day slavery. We are talking about how medical, educational, employment, financial, and housing outcomes remain disparate for Black Americans and Native Americans first and foremost, and other people of the global majority. We are talking about how the only college and university presidents to be called before Congress regarding pro-Palestinian protests on their campuses were women, and the woman who faced the highest degree of scrutiny was a Black woman. We are talking about how when the Key Bridge was hit, the first thing certain politicians thought to do was to blame Black and brown people for the tragedy. But then people were more concerned about what the mayor wore to the scene than the tragedy itself. We are talking about people who are attacking affirmative action and attacking diversity, equity, and inclusion because they are making it their current life's mission to undo decades of progress towards the ability of people of the global majority to exist, thrive, and be visible in the United States. Because for them, the last time this country was great was when they could commit atrocities against us without impunity. Now, if you are not one of those people who perpetuates the hatred of the past into the present, then why do you perceive talking about the past as hate? Because the United States was founded upon a system of chattel slavery, and for this discussion we can include indentured servitude as well, that caused significant portions of the United States economy to be grown based on the false premise that labor costs are zero. And this in turn is why capitalism values profit over personhood, because corporations are always trying to get their labor costs back down to zero. This is why workers are exploited. And the reason why we don't have better worker solidarity and advocacy for better benefits in the United States is rooted in anti-blackness, because there are too many people who would rather advocate against their own self-interest as long as it ensures that black people suffer worse. Too many people have been convinced to vote for policies that consolidate wealth and power, even if it means harming their own access to resources, as long as they believe that it keeps wealth and power away from black people. And this is why in the United States we have so many hardworking people who still struggle to earn a living wage and have to deal with food insecurity. This is also why it is very important for us to all work together regardless of race to dismantle supremacy culture and address capitalism. If after all the time you have spent watching my videos and all the energy that you have expended leaving comments like this, you haven't picked up on that from the information that I've provided, that is a you problem, because I've explained this many times, many ways. So the fact that I've asked you to use Black Americans, but you insist on using blacks with a lowercase b, does in fact tell us everything that we need to know about your level of ignorance and bias. But I'm glad that you do acknowledge that enslaved labor made the United States cotton economy possible. And it was the cotton economy that transformed the United States from a colonial society into a global trading power. But your timeline is off, because the cotton economy took off after the War of 1812, and by then the status of enslaved was established as being based on race, and the indentured servitude of Irish was on its way out. At that point, Irish Americans were already slave patrollers and overseers. If we think critically about your claim that if they did not have access to enslaved black labor, they simply would have gotten the Irish to do it, it falls apart. Because if it was an option to procure laborers from Europe, where the colonists were already coming from, why would they have ever pursued the much more costly and much more time-consuming process of importing enslaved labor from Africa? And it's because using Irish indentured servants didn't work. 200 years before, in the early colonies, in the 1600s, the original plan was to rely primarily on convict and indentured labor from Europe, as well as enslaved labor of Native Americans. But the arrival of the Europeans introduced diseases that killed too many Native Americans, and Irish indentured servants were quickly dying when put to hard labor. So they had to rely more on the transatlantic slave trade. Now, what they did not understand is that enslaved Africans had developed immunity to European diseases over time because of trade. So that enslaved Africans were immune to diseases that had killed Native Americans, and that enslaved Africans were acclimated to heat, which was killing Irish indentured servants, contributed to the pseudoscientific racist idea that enslaved Africans were built for labor. So actually, reliance on the enslaved labor of Africans and Black Americans was a necessity to growing the United States cotton economy. But another thing that I was wondering is, could you please explain to us why you find this funny? So first of all, the fact that the resources generated by enslaved labor contributed significantly to growing the United States economy does not care about your feelings. Your claims that but for chattel slavery, the United States would have found some other way to generate the same amount of wealth that would have put the United States economy in the same position is purely speculative. But let's talk about scienter. The fact that Bacon's Rebellion happened 100 years before United States independence, and that was the catalyst which led to solidifying race-based chattel slavery in the United States, contradicts your claim. Because it shows that the colonists believed that practicing race-based chattel slavery was going to benefit them. And the problem with your belief that race-based chattel slavery was insignificant and did not generate significant amounts of wealth in the United States that had a lasting impact on the economy is we are left believing that it was practiced in the United States for 200 years out of pure sadism. Because part 1 got interrupted by an earthquake. The last set of United States Census data taken before the Civil War shows that there were an estimated 4 million enslaved Africans and Black Americans in the United States. Cumulative data shows that from 1619 until 1860, there were 10 million enslaved Africans and Black Americans in the United States who contributed an estimated 410 billion hours of labor, with a significant amount of that growth occurring from 1820 until the Civil War. So let's be clear here, the practice was not limited in scope. At the time of the Civil War, nearly 1/3 of Confederate households were directly participating in the enslavement of 4 million Africans and Black Americans. So you are making the claim that it was of no economic benefit to the United States because you don't want to acknowledge anything that detracts from your belief that it was white Americans solely who grew the United States economy, and you definitely don't want to acknowledge the financial basis for reparations. The thing is, if you don't acknowledge the economic contribution of those 410 billion hours of enslaved labor, what you are left with is having to acknowledge that for 200 plus years, the United States engaged in the enslavement of 10 million people and fought a bloody war with itself to defend the right to own human beings as property and to brutalize them simply because they enjoyed doing so. So whether you recognize it or not, you are making the argument for reparations.
I'm glad you watched this extent. I don't know what you think about this particular video, but I feel like this is the starting point. This is where people should start. For us to be able to dismantle racism, people have to acknowledge first that there is that systemic racism, there is that privilege that they have benefiting, that they are having because of their races. When people acknowledge that, that will be the starting point. But how many people acknowledge that they are privileged? How many people always find ways to defend this kind of privileges? But this is someone who acknowledges, and it takes humility to get to that, you know. And when you speak of reparation, I don't know if that will be possible, but we will keep advocating until we see racism is dismantled. When are we going to have a society where everyone feels welcomed regardless of their race, ethnicity, and that's where we're heading, and that's why we are here. So hope this video was helpful. It's an eye-opener. It's an eye-opener, and also it's an awareness. Let's acknowledge and fight racism. There is need for us to dismantle racism as much as, and when you speak of racism, it's something recent. The bridge collapse was yesterday, and people find a reason to blame a race on that, you know, when it's not a past thing. It is a recent thing that we are speaking of. When you speak of racism, it's something that is ongoing. So don't say that it's an old thing, it's still operating right now. So don't hesitate to leave your thoughts in the comment section, and thank you so much for stopping by. Let's hope that one day racism will be dismantled through your efforts. Don't forget to like the video, kindly share the video. Goodbye for now.